Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
Hey everybody, I am Troy Edgar and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and professional growth and opportunity across America. This week, Ameritocracy visits Sacramento, California, where I had the opportunity to meet with Cath Reheis-Boyd, President and CEO of the Western States Petroleum Association. Her organization represents the industry's interests in exploration, production, refining, and transportation across California, Arizona, Nevada, Washington, and Oregon. From her roots in natural resource management to nearly 40 years in the energy sector, Cath discusses California's evolving oil and gas landscape, the challenges of recent state policies on drilling, and the balance needed between the environmental goals and economic stability. Her insights shed light on how California's energy policies impact the entire West Coast and the nation. Tune in and hear from an industry leader committed to pragmatic solutions and passionate about guiding the energy sector into the future of meaningful change. I hope you enjoy. Good afternoon, Cath. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming down here into this great Sacramento weather.
It's beautiful. However, I drove through snow to get here just for you, just to see you. And I've never even met you.
Oh my gosh. You drove through snow.
I drove through snow from Carson City, Nevada. And Nevada is one of our states. So visit there.
Wow. So snowing.
Snowing. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have imagined that. It seems so nice here in Sacramento.
It was pleasant getting over the mountains and seeing the sunshine.
Wow. Well, thank you. I fist bump to you. Thank you. Well, Cath, I'm super excited to have you on the show. I have been looking at a lot of different dimensions of California. Obviously, we're a national show, but being from California, seeing, born and raised in Long Beach and kind of Norco, and then going into the service and coming back and doing stuff. I take a lot of time to focus on what's going on policy-wise in California, and you being so involved with oil and gas, I thought it would be really interesting for our listeners to be able to kind of get an idea of you as a career path, what you've done, and your experience, and then your industry, and just kind of set it up a little bit within oil and gas. And, you and I've talked about this off air as, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, oil and gas was one of the most important factors for the state. When you look at the research for California infrastructure, the water projects, the freeway systems, the Cal State schools, the UC schools, the oil and gas industry played a major part in that process. And, I've talked in different shows too about the tax structure within that generates revenue for the state and the state budget, and now being more mainly focused on personal income as the mainstay. Back in the day, it had a lot to do with the real estate, the excise tax, and the tax that would be made on business transactions. And so it's definitely quite a transition to kind of where we're at today. So I just wanted to thank you. And I wanted to give you kind of an opportunity, if you wouldn't mind, just to introduce yourself to the audience and a little bit of your background.
All right. Thank you, Troy. So this is my 34th year with Western States Petroleum Association, and I'm actually 40 years now in the energy industry. So it's been quite a journey. And so I've seen a lot over that time period. I was never really focused on the oil and gas industry through my career. I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, got my degree in natural resource management. So a lot of my experience and expertise comes from the environmental side, which has actually served me well in the state of California as my career path sort of took off. So, it's the intersection, I think, of energy and the environment is what really got my attention. And so sort of being thrown into that originally as a consultant, like yourself, down in La Jolla, San Diego area, that's where I first got introduced to the challenges that the energy industry faced, on the social side and on the environmental side, and found that the best way to sort of move people into a conversation that actually is impactful and matters to a place like California, very strong in its environmental goals and leadership, is to find a way to bring those parties together to have real conversations that are impactful and make a difference. So I focused a lot of my attention on that, no matter where I've been in that career path.
I noticed that you also have a degree from USC. But
I almost have a degree from USC.
okay.
So it's an interesting story. So when I worked for Texaco in Bakersfield, Getty Oil, then Texaco, one of the things that they told me is you could never advance in the company unless you had an engineering degree. I was not an engineer, didn't want to be an engineer, but I decided, okay, I could do environmental engineering. And so I drove 2 nights a week down to USC from Bakersfield to take courses to get my master's in environmental engineering. Didn't particularly like it, but I needed to do it to advance. And one of the things that I have found is that I'm always, about the goal. So what is the barrier? How do I get over it? That's what I'm going to do. And so during that process, Western States Petroleum Association contacted me, and I said, "Oh, well, of course you want engineers." "Well, we don't really hire engineers." And I'm like, "You mean I don't have to be an engineer?" So something I regret in my life is not finishing, because I got 3/4 of the way through, and it wasn't important to them. I wasn't that important to me. I was doing it, checking it off, get over the hump. And so I ended up not finishing quite at the end. But then I think what that helped on that journey was just the persistence and dedication of what it took to go 2 nights a week, driving from Bakersfield to USC, taking extra calculus courses up at the local college during lunch. Just that, it's like whatever barrier's there, you just got to break it down if it's going to get you to the next goal that you have. So I think I learned a lot through that process, but never quite got there.
Talk a little bit about, so you get out of college and you start working in the oil and gas industry. What type of work specifically?
So originally out of Cal Poly, my last course at Cal Poly was on environmental impact reports. So much more on the environmental side. The teacher, and I was the star student in that class, was from Grace Petroleum. And he said, "You need to come to work for me." I'm not working for the oil industry. And he goes, "Well, you work for an environmental consulting firm who works for us." "Well, where are they?" "They're in La Jolla." I think that would be a great job.
That'd be a good
so
one.
Down I went to La Jolla from San Luis Obispo, and it was a consulting firm who did a lot of technical measurements to describe how emissions from a facility impacted communities. So I did a project in Raft River, Idaho, from a power plant, released an inert gas called SF6 through the stack, and then we had monitors around the community to see how far it would go, what concentration it would be. So that was one simulation. The other one was I was off of Avila Beach in my alma mater on a ship from the Monterey Postgraduate School, and we did the same thing to simulate an offshore platform, released emissions from the ship, had monitors on. So it was very technical oriented, my first job, but it did get me into the oil and gas connection because there were so many different things to monitor. And then I went off to Vandenberg Air Force Base and lived on base for a while. My favorite thing was the Officers Club, just to note. Then it was to collect data from wind towers, because they were, the Monterey Postgraduate School was simulating how ships approach a country during war. So it was all this sort of very technical stuff. And then I found that I really missed being with a team. I didn't really like this sort of sole practitioner idea. So then I ended up going to Bakersfield and started with Getty Oil, then Texaco, then Chevron took over Texaco, and then voila, Western States Petroleum Association snagged me for the next 34 years.
So I'm not familiar with Bakersfield and its oil and gas. I grew up in Long Beach area and definitely familiar with the refineries. What is the big action that takes place in Bakersfield?
So it is a very large producer of oil. And for those that are not as familiar, obviously crude oil comes out of the ground and then you have to get it to a refiner to make something useful out of it, like gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. But without crude oil, you can't make those products. So we are blessed in the state of California with what I call the Petroleum Strategic Reserve, which is actually in Kern County's ground. And the only problem is that the state of California, because of its political views, doesn't allow us to drill and permit and get the oil out of the ground. Very unfortunate. This is not the case over the last 20 years. This has been a very recent phenomena over the last 5 years. So where we could be very energy independent in the state of California, where we have our own crude oil, we could get it safely out of the ground, mostly Kern County, little Monterey, little Southern California, different regions, get it to refiners to make these products. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that. And that is a very frustrating thing for me at this point in my career, because it's just such an essential element to make the system work.
You know, you and I talked off mic. I grew up in Southern California, going to the beach, having a great time. And I remember 70s, we need to stop the offshore drilling. And so you always knew that, being in Long Beach, there's definitely a history there for oil being, discovered and a bunch of stuff, Signal Hill. A lot of the activity was really kind of held up, like that city, that area for a long time. And then now it's a bunch of Costco and shopping. But it's just kind of interesting to kind of see the ebb and flow. And, when you talk about like California having its own reserve, like you said, and then you look at Western State Petroleum, it's actually an amalgamation of you said Nevada earlier because you drove through the snow, but with Washington, Oregon, Arizona, I think those are the states.
Yeah, and California.
So out of that, why band together those states? Definitely could see California being a big thing, but is there a lot of activity in the other states?
Yeah, that's a great question. And going back in time, the federal government set up various what they call pads throughout the nation. And this is known as Pad 5. Okay. So it's just a natural connection of entities in the West Coast known as Pad 5. In Washington, we have many refineries, 5 refineries up there that certainly supply fuel to various areas. Oregon does not have refineries, but obviously gets serviced from Washington and other areas. California, everything, oil and refining. And then Arizona and Nevada, they don't have refiners or oil. So they're very dependent on California, which is why you see so much activity right now with Governor Hobbs, Governor Lombardo, 2 governors, Arizona, Nevada, different parties, banding together and writing a letter to Governor Newsom about the concerns of California policies, because everything California does impacts the fuel availability and cost and price for both of those states, who very much depend on California's refining and crude oil production.
Wow. The number of refineries, I'm a finance guy, so you said there was a certain amount up in Oregon or Washington. I just was recently reading about the Phillips Petroleum and what was happening in LA or Southern California area, potentially closing that refinery. How many refineries are there actually now in California? And what has been like statistically the number, and what direction has it went?
Yeah, that's another excellent question. So when I started, there were actually 30 refineries. Okay. And then over time, we are now at 9 now that produce gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. And with the Phillips announcement at the end of 25, they will close. That will leave us 8. The very concerning thing is we still have 40 million people who drive 36 million cars and trucks every day. Yeah. So even though there is a ban on the sale of internal combustions in 2035, we're still going to have a boatload, that's a very technical term, a boatload of cars and trucks that we still have to supply fuel. And so this makes a very constrained market for a state like California. So now you're thinking of California and where it gets its fuel, and you ask yourself, that's interesting, where does it get its fuel? It's an energy island. There are no pipelines that bring product or crude oil to the state. So you either produce it here and refine it here, or it's all coming from 30 to 40 days away from places like Asia, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela. And it takes a long time to get here if it's even the right specification, because there's, we have the cleanest burning gasoline on the planet in California, which is wonderful. However, not many people make it.
Yeah.
And so, again, if you're going to have policies that begin to have companies make decisions like Phillips has made and others I'm sure who are considering, that makes this market very constrained. And that is going to put pressure on price, which is not going to be a pleasant experience for any elected official.
When I'm a layman when it comes to oil and gas, so I'm just going to ask the question. So all these different countries, Venezuela, other countries who bring oil in versus pulling it out of the ground, the process to get it ready to be refined, any different grade of oil difference? When they say clean oil or certain blends of oil, some of that is in the refinement process, but it at the core, when whether you got it from Venezuela, other than the transportation costs, same product, or does it have to have extra refinement if it's from different areas?
It doesn't, it may take a different equipment in a refinery, but most refineries are geared to take now a large slate of crude oil. In the early days, they were totally geared to take San Joaquin Valley crude, Central California crude, which is a heavier crude. It doesn't mean that there's more emissions from it, because it all depends what you're doing to capture emissions. And so California has the most stringent regulations in the world. And so where we have very strict controls on even any kinds of emissions coming out of any tiny element of a pipe system, in these other countries, they do not. So my view is, if California wants to be a leader in climate change and emission technology, it should be focusing on what we do here best, instead of really putting it on a ship 40 days away, causing California consumers paying more for it, having those emissions, as you've noted, coming from those tankers to get here, when all of that can be done in our own backyard, safely, cleanly, and socially responsible. So I know there's a better way, and my whole desire is to get on that better path than the one we're on.
I'm a supply chain guy, so when I start looking at the shocks that we felt during the pandemic, when you start talking about our dependency on having to have foreign oil brought in because we don't want to tap in, from a national security perspective, that would be one-sided and extreme. And I guess as long as there's multiple ways to get fuel, the other part, like you said, is the refinement process that we have like a mix that's so unique that only the refiners in this state, if I understand you correctly, can do that level of refinement. Is that the difference that we pay? Like I'm here in Sacramento, but I live in Orange County, but I'm in DC a lot. Seems like gas a lot cheaper everywhere but here. Is it that extra refinement, or is it the excise tax to kind of penalize us for using fossil fuel, or both?
It's a combination of things. And one of California's stated purposes, and they're pretty bold about it, is to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. Now, our view of that is, right now we have a system that we all depend on that is based on traditional oil and gas, ever cleaner every day. I mean, we're doing all kinds of things on the traditional oil and gas side to reduce emissions and make it the best product we can. But as we are transitioning into a lower carbon economy, our companies are also seriously invested in wind, in solar, in electric battery technology, in hydrogen, in renewable natural gas, in renewable diesel. We have two refiners that just within the last 2 years converted to renewable diesel in the Bay Area. So you took two refineries who were producing traditional oil and gas and gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, who are now only producing renewable diesel. So that gasoline was now replaced by that. So tighter market, again, pressure on the system, because that's the unique fuel blend that we have in California. Certainly the best environmentally, but costly. So costs more to make it. And then on top of that, you have a lot of different policies and regulations that the leadership of California, because there's environmental leadership is such a cornerstone of the state, those also have brought costs, and don't want to even begin to go down those rabbit holes, but you got low carbon fuel standard, cap and trade, all these different programs that have a price tag that other places in the nation don't pay. So there is always going to be a difference of price between California gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and the rest of the nation because of the unique blend, because of the isolation, energy island, because of the policies that California has put in place to reduce emissions. And so you're always going to see that differential, no matter, and I think there's several now coming that have not even been factored in that were just in the last special session that got adopted. So it's becoming quite the topic of how are we going to address this?
So I got a question. So Western State Petroleum Association means the Western State, or this PAD, to use your term. I spend a lot of time outside of California. A lot of my friends that are in politics in different areas, it seems like it always used to be that where California goes, the nation goes. A lot of the environmental policies and the regulations aren't seeming to be as accepted. And what I see as a business person outside of maybe what you see, and maybe you see the same thing, is that California may be starting to break the club up. And, and that the nations, they're like, hey, good idea, California, but not for us, not for our economy, et cetera, for other reasons. And I was just curious, Western State Petroleum Association, is there an Eastern States Petroleum? So can we talk about California in the context of your association, or maybe your collaboration with other groups to see how this slots across the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. There's two other main organizations that we coordinate at the national level, and that's the American Petroleum Institute. So they represent crude oil producers and refiners in every area except our Western states.
Got it.
The other one is AFPM, the American Fuel Petrochemical Association. And they represent only refiners, same territory, but not the West. Okay. So between the three, we represent everybody. Okay. And we coordinate on and talk all the time. I think the change I'm seeing is definitely, it used to be, as you say, well, that's California, and, as California goes, the rest of the nation goes. And I think what's happened is, and I've seen this over my career, when the pendulum swings too far to either the environment or the economy, it's not good policy. It's always best when it's smack dab in the middle. It's the balance between the two, and you really have to achieve that to actually make any of this work. So my view is it's pace and scale. That's what people are getting nervous about. Is it too little, too slow, or too much, too fast?
Yeah.
And somewhere in there's the right answer. But I do think right now what people are seeing is this aggressiveness in California against the very industry that's going to move it where it wants to go in the future. And that is not, and even with the media, it's not making sense.
Right.
It's like, if not us, then who? We're going to be the ones, right? And so it's concerning, I think, for not only us, but I'm hearing it in much bigger circles, that people are beginning to pause and ask some very serious questions about what is going on here. Why are these companies making these tough decisions? Why is Chevron moving its headquarters out of state when they've been here 145 years?
Right.
I mean, why are investors on investor calls, which are public calls, anyone can listen to them, why are the actual investors saying, oh no, we're not going to invest in California, you're not going to get any more capital. You know this world. That's all happening. And when all that starts happening at a pace and scale that really is getting people's attention, that's what I think is happening right now. People are like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And so I think it's an opening for us to have a different conversation about really what needs to be done in California to get us on a better path than the one we're on.
I think what's been interesting, like I said, let me back up. I haven't said this. I've done a lot of work in the automotive industry before I went into federal. I had sat through I'm on the finance side, I sat through a lot of strategy discussions where, they would follow what is happening in California, and they would say, hey, by 2032, 2035, we're going to not have gas automobiles anymore. So we better start moving our production. And then being a finance person that sees the financials for solar powered cars are not good for a lot of reasons. They'll get to scale over time, but profitability per unit, and it's all unit costs when it comes to that type of stuff, is not there. You see the problems with them trying to put the the electrifying the highways not really working out. And I think that the challenge that you see is at some point, maybe it was good aspirational. I think when they started talking about cap and trade and then, AB 32, the back, when they were trying to get we were going to start using these as trade credits, trade my environmental capability and you can actually monetize it and sell it. I started realizing that maybe that was more aspirational. And now we're trying to create a game out of doing this. And I guess where I just wonder is like, if the pendulum has shifted a little too far, maybe there is a level of claiming ground. I remember in the 70s growing up when we had smog days. I remember, so all those things, you couldn't play football, you couldn't do this, that. And, but like, I guess when you look swinging back the other way, your forecast from your seat nationally now, you see these different things. Where do you see this heading? California doesn't seem like they would almost need something very significant to happen to change pace. And it's a one-party state. There's different factions within that one party, but some of them are economic too, just to be fair. But I'm just kind of curious, and will we be able to see any sort of a shift, either intra one party or two parties, and then the policies needed to switch us back to, or do we have to hit the cataclysmic ground first to make a significant shift? When you're advising your industry, what do you guys think?
Yeah, that's a packed full question. But technical realities do get in the way of aspirational goals. And I think that's what we're seeing, because hope is not a plan. And I would say 10 years ago, we were really working on a plan, and it was a diversified energy portfolio. We never put our eggs in one basket. We never even thought of putting our eggs in one basket. And somewhere along the way, the state had decided electricity was the answer. And no matter what the other technologies were that were just as competitive and coming through the pipe. And so I think what's happening politically now is you have a lot of moderate Democrats in the state. And I think we still probably stay a one-party state for the most part. But you do see a lot of very pragmatic Democrats within the legislature who do see the balance, and they do not believe you have to have one or the other, that you actually can have both. And so those are the folks we gravitate towards to have conversations in hopes that they can have the right conversations with maybe some of their more progressive legislators. So we really spend a lot of our time in those conversations with them because they have that balance of both. And it's going to take a shift in that thinking and a realization. We cannot have we call it the Diablo Canyon moment, which is on the transportation side. You cannot have what happened on the electricity side. You can't have rolling blackouts, because we'll go back to the 70s, to gas lines, to absolute chaos. We move the economy. Our industry moves the economy every single day. And so I always say people get up every morning, hopefully, and they want three things. They want to wake up and heat and cool their homes, drive from A to B, and turn their lights on. And if they can do those three things, life is good. And so we have to get back to thinking about what is the best plan for California to make all those three things happen, balancing all those different opinions, bringing people together, and then getting where the state wants to go. I mean, we really don't question the state's aspirational goals, as they may be, but we do question the lack of collaboration that has deteriorated over the last 10 years. Certainly in my career, we used to do all this stuff together. Whether it was legislatively, agencies, regulatory. I can remember going up and down the state with the U.S. EPA when we took sulfur out of diesel, and we stood behind buses with handkerchiefs to show the world that this is great. It's clean diesel. It's wonderful. But we used to do all that stuff collaboratively, and now it is so divisive that it's hard to make any movement. So I think that's got the attention also nationwide, because divisiveness is not going to be what brings us together. And we're way more united than we are, than people actually realize in this space, if we could just come together.
Yeah, I tell a lot of people, everybody's like, oh my God, it seems so polarizing on almost every issue. And my perspective is a little bit different, is that I think we're going through a really interesting change management process in civilization, where, we have real-time contact with everything going on. we're in saturation mode. We have unlimited power at the personal point to be able to give an opinion, and we're really trying to figure out how that's going to work. People are having challenges being addicted to their phones, so we're also trying to figure out, like, how do we moderate communicating? And but I think, bringing it back to oil and gas, I think where I start to think there's something to it, I think on two fronts in California. One is on oil and gas. That refinement process that's so specialized in California goes one way. You won't say it because you're the association, but I would say I see prices going through the roof, and there's not an alternative in place yet. Realistically, technical has not met aspirational, as you said, and price has a way of waking people up.
Yeah.
And then on the top end, our tax structure focuses on high income people, where you have 150,000 people making the highest level of income that really support 40 million people. And those people are getting ready to leave because now we're putting pressure on them with the highest state income tax twice, New York, across the nation. And so pretty soon now we don't have the ability to provide services, but the budget's baked. So it's hard to start chipping it away, where we have these flexibilities and basically deficits or surpluses. And so I think when the oil and gas starts having this problem, prices start spiking, you get the people that are paying the tax bill moving out. I do wonder if you would have a hardcore pendulum shift one way or the other. And I don't mean politically, just ideologically. And maybe those moderate voices become a little bit more powerful from your perspective.
I would agree with that, because I think sometimes that's the jolt it takes, unfortunately. Not the best way to plan, but sometimes that's the way it happens. Mm-hmm. And so I think that shift will come. I think we're in the midst of it. I think we're just seeing it. We're starting to see it. And one thing we have learned is to really tap into the self-interest of people. What are they feeling? Mm-hmm. Not what do we think they should be feeling. What are they feeling? Mm-hmm. And there is a lot of angst out in just the general public about what it costs in this state, from electricity, from housing, from healthcare, from you name it. Yeah. And so I think that's also ours, obviously energy is a big piece of that, but it's everything else that's coming on. And I'm hearing it from everyone, our agricultural friends, our warehouse owners, our ports, I've never heard this level of angst across the board as I am hearing now I think actually maybe the last time I heard it was, 2006, when the price of crude oil tanked to $6 a barrel instead of 80 or 90. Wow. And I lived through that. Yeah. So I remember those days, and I remembered the layoffs, and I remember. So I hope that it doesn't take that kind of a jolt. And I have to give the credit to the media a little bit here, because I think as they're digging in, they're getting much more interested in what is really going on. And so it's becoming more real than just political. And so some of the political rhetoric that I am not fond of at all that is occurring right now, bashing and attacking this industry, which in my opinion is one of the most innovative, wonderful, problem-solving. I say that because I represent them. But it's very unfortunate to see this aggression against the very industry that is going to carry the state forward into the low-carbon economy that they want. And so that's what keeps me still doing it after 40 years. Is I'm like you, glass half full. And so I'm optimistic that we'll get a shift. We can get back to doing what we do best, which is solving problems for the state of California, getting it where it wants to be, and it can be the leader in all of these things, as long as we are in a path together versus this divisiveness, which is really setting us back. And I think sets all of the environmental programs back that the state has been successful on.
So Cath, as we kind of get towards the closing, I want to kind of take a pivot if I can. So your career, you explained how you got into oil and gas. Your background, when I ran for state assembly in 2012, I had to spend a lot of time up here. As a guy from Orange County, I'd come up and meet with all the different associations, the lobbyists, and I would go through and I learned a tremendous amount, just educated. If you come in and you're like, hey, transactional, I'm trying to meet people and try to get people to support me in I'll call it the third house of the lobbying side. But I loved how much information I really learned about California. And what I realized is people like yourself, I don't know you personally, but your reputation is that you have a capability in it. It's what you just said, which sounded a little harsh. It's like, hey, it's this negative. My industry is a little bit under attack. But on the surface, you're that professional person that's out there finding that middle ground. And I think that's your reputation, whether it's Josh Newman in Orange County, who's a big supporter and fan of yours. And, and I think finding that is like, you have to have kind of two components, it seems like, to do the type of work. And I want to explore this a little bit for people that are interested in getting in this line. Is you definitely have to know your technical vocation. But you also, I think, you got to be a little smart. Maybe it's EQ, maybe it's political. And I was just kind of curious, like when you look across and you see the different people that do the work that you do, whether it's in agriculture, the motion picture industry, the Cal Chamber, any of that, what is some of the things that you see that make people successful that want to go down this path? Is it one that you have to do 20 or 30 years and then eventually get into the association so you got something to bring?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's that curiosity. If you are curious every single day and you're really, no matter what career you're in, but if you're living your life powerfully and you live the life you love and you're curious and you are empathetic and you are interested in stepping aside and understanding other people's views, and putting your own aside for a moment so you can really bring people together to solve problems. I know that's kind of cliche-ish a little bit, but if you're really invested in that process, that's where you're going to make the difference. And the people I see in this state or any state that make the difference, who are willing to do that and get curious and are willing to step away from their own views and really pursue the common goal, whatever it may be at the moment, that you actually make real progress. And it's not easy. It's very difficult because we are who we are, right? We come up with what we got. But I always say nobody has a corner on wisdom, and you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. And so if you can come into any conversation like that, I think it just can be so impactful. And it's, that's that active listening and really gearing into, okay, what is really motivating this person? What are they feeling? What was their life? I need to tap into what they're feeling if I'm going to get anywhere close to a common ground solution. And that's the characteristic that I see making the most difference. And when you can find, and there's a lot of people in this state that actually do this well. And so some of them are think tanks, some of them are academia, some of them are business people, some of them are agriculture. I mean, some of them are my workers who are in the field doing this every single day to support their families. That you get that group together, and I guarantee you can solve any of these problems that California is talking about, because these are all solvable. They are all solvable, and yet we're not solving them. So that's what I'm really focusing on. And Senator Newman is one of those folks. Others that really get that view of, look at why are we all arguing? What are we arguing about? We're much more united than we are divided. So what is the goal that we're both after? And then how do we make sure everybody's got a piece of that? Because it is doable. And it frustrates me that we are struggling, which we are right now, greatly struggling in this state to make progress.
I guess the last question is like tenacity. I've been involved with politics at all different levels. When you don't prevail, it's hard. Wake up that next day, it's like, well, I can imagine in your type of work, you win and you lose, and you get some support, partial support. You're trying to get things through committees to get to the full vote. Thought you had it, didn't have it. Got to wake up the next day. It's a brand new day, right? So I would think tenacity would be kind of something. How do you stay positive and be able to kind of keep your eye on the prize? Or do you finally just get to the point, it's like, well, 40 years is good enough. It's like, because I mean, clearly you could have hit that point at 28 years. You could have hit it at 30 something. And you wake up every day, when I talk to you, you're like, you're still got that enthusiasm. And I'm just kind of curious because you see that in a lot of, so I did see a lot of people that were in associations or within lobbying that kind of lost that love and feeling. Like they probably, it's like a teacher, my wife's a teacher. It's like teachers that probably should have said, hey, I'd had a good run. But you still are like super excited. I get enthused when I talk to you. I'm just curious, how do you keep that tenacity going?
And I think back, obviously my parents were a strong force and, you can do anything you want. Mm-hmm. There's nothing you can overcome. And then my brother and 4 siblings, my 4 sisters and my brother have just been such a huge support for me through my whole life. Mm. And so they've always, driven me. And I took one of those, personality tests or whatever a while ago, and I was like a driver on steroids. So, I mean, the lady who gave it to me, she says, I've been doing Fortune 500 executives. I've never seen these scores. Yeah. There's good things about that and not good things about that, by the way, but I'll focus on the good things about that. Yeah. But I'm very focused on execution and just, getting to the goal, no matter how long it takes. Mm-hmm. And through my whole life, it's been, climbing Mount Shasta. I'm going to get there. I don't care if I'm, have altitude sickness and my feet are bleeding. I don't care. I'm going to get to the top of Whitney. So it's always about that. But but I also learned that, life is really about the journey and it's not the destination. Because every time I reached the top, it was like, well, what's next? Yeah. That was great, but really what you think about is what it took to get there. So I really am blessed with this desire to wake up every day and just go at it. And those losses just become incentives to get back out and keep going, because eventually you do get to a better place. And it may not even have been the place you envisioned. It actually could be better than what you envisioned. Yeah. And so I've just been always that half, glass half empty, glass half full, and always just been very motivated to get up and just keep trying. Persistence, determination, just it will pay off.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Cath, it's been a pleasure having you on the show and learn a lot about oil and gas. I really appreciate you making time to come down here.
No, I appreciate you, Troy. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.